It's time to give my thoughts on yet another collection. We did Namco Museum Archives Volume 1, so now it's time to do Volume 2. Yet again, this is a collection full of NES games. And again, some of these are arcade games. And some never had an arcade version. But all of these are games that were made for the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System. Just like Volume 1, there are 11 games in total, and we will be going in the order the collection presents them in. Starting with number 1, Galaga. This is an early shoot-'em-up, but one that showed some refinement over Galaxian. Of course, the most famous thing about Galaga is that you can do the little trick to have 2 ships to shoot with at the same time, which actually is an interesting trade-off to make, as it does require you to sacrifice one of your lives, and it also makes you twice as big of a target. But it does double up your firepower, so is it actually worth doing? Who's to say? But I know when I was a child, I thought this was the coolest thing ever. And I always tried to do it, even when I didn't have enough lives to actually pull it off. I imagine I wasn't the only child to make that mistake. Next we have Battle City, which is a top-down game where you control a tank shooting other tanks. Sorta like Combat on the 2600. There's a maze you can take cover in, and there's several different types of walls. And I was surprised to see that there are various kinds of power-ups in this game, as well as there being a few different kinds of enemy tanks. I'm a little surprised by all the variety in this game, given it's originally from 1985. I could actually see myself coming back to this game. Sadly, at number 3, we have Pac-Land. I have never been a fan of Pac-Land. Now admittedly, this version of Pac-Land is actually a little more playable than the original arcade version, but that still doesn't really make it enjoyable in my opinion. It's just a bare bones and kind of frustrating platformer that happens to star Pac-Man. I'm sure that there are Pac-Land fans that exist somewhere, but I am not one of them, so I'm gonna move on. At number 4, we have Dig Dug 2. This was a game that I did not know about until I started playing various Namco collections. And I am a huge fan of the original Dig Dug, and while the gameplay here is considerably different, it's still a fine game. Instead of digging tunnels, we are slowly cutting off pieces of an island in each stage. And you want the monsters to be on the piece of the island that you're cutting off in each stage. But failing that, you can still inflate the monsters to death, and that still seems like a very painful way to go. Much like the original Dig Dug, I could play Dig Dug 2 all day long. At number 5, we have Super Xevious, which is a lot like the original, but more refined. This time around, there are actually a few power-ups to get, and each of the levels actually requires you to do something in order to progress to the next. Failing to do what you need it to do will just lead to the level looping. Unfortunately, I don't think the game really communicates exactly what you're supposed to do, so you are gonna end up looping levels a lot. I know I certainly did. Next, we have Mappy Land. And this was never an arcade game, this went straight to the NES. Again, you're playing as a mouse, and you're trying to avoid cats. In each stage, you're just trying to collect all the items, so the way to the next stage will open. It's very similar to the original game, what with the trampolines and the cats to avoid, but the design of the levels is a little bit more original. This time around, you're meant to be in some kind of theme park. I actually think this is quite a bit easier than the original Mappy. I definitely had more fun with it than the original Mappy. At number 7, we have Legacy of the Wizard, another non-arcade game. There's actually a lot to be said about Legacy of the Wizard, and it probably deserves a video all its own someday. But you play as a family that has to explore a labyrinth. Different parts of that labyrinth are meant for different family members. And each family member plays a little bit differently and has their own items that give them abilities to allow you to progress. If you're going into this without any kind of help, things are going to be a little confusing and take you a while to figure out. And it's a little unfortunate that you don't have access to the manual in this collection, because the original manual for this game had a lot of information that is very useful to you. But this game is definitely a high point for this particular collection. At number 8, we have Rolling Thunder, and this was a game I remember renting a lot as a child. And when I would rent it, I don't remember it being nearly as hard as this. But anyway, you're a guy trying to infiltrate somewhere, and you're gonna shoot a lot of people. And there's a lot of things for you to kind of duck behind for protection. So it's sort of like an 8-bit version of something like Gears of War, or some other kind of cover-based shooter. Much like when I was a child, I still look at this and think the characters are all proportioned very strangely for an 8-bit game. I do think if I sat and played this for a while, I would probably get the hang of it again. But honestly, there's other games in this collection I'd rather spend my time playing. Next we have Dragon Buster 2, which actually was a Japanese exclusive. As far as I can tell, there's not a great deal of text, and with a little trial and error, you can sort of figure out what you're meant to be doing, as you need to go into these various locations, kill something that has a key, and use that key to then leave the area and go to the next. It kinda plays like a very simple version of Zelda, really. I do sort of wonder if anything changes as you get deeper into the game, but at the same time, the gameplay didn't hold my interest long enough for me to find that out. At number 10, we have Mel Palace. And this has almost a Mega Man thing going on here. You choose to fight one of these people. You're then taken to these strange arenas where you're trying to push them into walls. And they're trying to do the same to you. But they can also kill you by just touching you. As you go on, you'll start noticing that the different characters do actually have different abilities, some of which seem a lot more useful and dangerous to you than others. I'm not sure that there's any kind of story here, but the gameplay actually kept me interested for quite a while, as some of the characters you fight get very difficult to actually slam into those walls to defeat them. I might actually go back someday and see what happens at the end of this game. The final game in this collection is Gapless, though I've also seen this referred to as Galaga 2 in other collections, and a lot of it plays the same as Galaga. But this time, instead of just being able to have a second ship next to you, you can actually capture the enemy ships or bugs or whatever they're supposed to be, and you can end up having a whole fleet next to you, all firing in unison. This is a game I really wish I would have known about when I was a child, because I know I would have been very into this. And that was Namco Museum Archives Volume 2. Honestly, I do think the selection here in Volume 2 is a little bit better than it was in Volume 1, though both volumes are fairly good collections and do have a fairly good amount of genre diversity to keep you interested playing them. When these collections came out in 2020, I kinda hoped we'd keep getting more volumes, but here we are in 2024, and there has not been a Volume 3. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.